morning, folks. This is Talking Point here on WESN, your content capital, television with a difference. Sean Michael Small here, soon to be joined by the good lady herself. Alas, no Keaton Shaw, but we await the day, hashtag re-release Keaton Shaw. In the meantime, well, they have some major stories to get into, some continuation, some new developments. The question is, to what extent will it be a shock to you? Will it cause you to change your perceptions? Will it cause your perceptions to be adjusted negatively, more negatively, perhaps? Or maybe not at all? Well, let's find out together. Time for today's Daily Review. Starting off with an ongoing story, of course, ever since Parliament was open and the President said that she would like to see the opposition and the government majority come together to talk about crime, to work together about crime. There's been a proposed crime talks between the two sides of Parliament ever since, and now they have seemed to have completely stalled, as the latest update doesn't necessarily even include any new rounds of official communication between the two sides, but rather it's basically just, well, they're waiting for each other. That's more or less where we've reached. These talks have stalled because it seems as though neither side wants to necessarily make any adjustments or compromises to their position on the terms of the talks. We ain't even talking about compromises on the contents of the talk. We just talking about the terms, deciding how the talks will be held. Before the talks can even be held, they can't come together. And I have to ask, if this is the state of just how we could deal with crime and the state of our politics, to some extent, I do wonder, how is it that we're just so enraptured by the incumbents that, oh, no, it's fine that we have what we have, right? Everything is going great, right? Except, what do people do? They complain about politicians, and then they vote in the same politicians. And then they see all politicians who failed come back, and they're like, woo, let's vote them in again. Now, the crux of the matter is simple. On one hand, on a technical level, I could appreciate the opposition's point. Appreciation does not necessarily mean that I 100% agree with them and find them not culpable for their own position. But let's just start off with the government's position. And the opposition made the point that, look, they're setting these terms. What gives them the right to set these terms? Yes, they are the government, they have the majority in Parliament, but the whole point is it's a bilateral talk. It's one-on-one, right? The majority does not come to play here. The whole thing is coming together. And part of it is, as the government, it would have, at least this is my opinion now, it would have done well for them to take the lead and, give some concessions to show that we're serious about this. Not so much concessions that, the shoes on the other foot, but give, not trying to say, well, we're going to have 5, you're going to have 4. And you have this deadline to send us names. The deadline from the Attorney General who, it's things like this that make it difficult to forget his unfortunate remarks in Miami. It's things like this that makes it difficult to accept his version of events when the file disappeared. And then all of a sudden, make big fuss, right? Make big fuss to ensure that, hey, it's not my fault. The file disappeared, it's somebody else's fault. And then what? We hear nothing else after. And it's very, very, very hard to look worse than your predecessor when your predecessor did such a bad job on a technical level in the office of the Attorney General. But hey, if Reggie wants to, give Faris some competition as the worst PNM AG under a Keith Rowley-held administration, more power to him. But he sets a deadline. Why? Why are you setting a deadline? What is the purpose of the deadline? The deadline has come and gone. What now? it's a lame duck deadline. There's nothing behind that deadline, no reasonable reason for that deadline. And again, why is it 5 and 4? I get it. If it's 4 and 4, there might be an impasse in the talks, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to have bilateral talks if you're basically saying, we are greater than you. We are not equal. Well then, why is the other side going to want to come together? Now the flip side is, also, government set the terms, parliamentarians only, certain number only. Now, I understand there's practical considerations that I will agree with. On the other hand, why does it have to be limited to parliamentarians? My thing is just the number of active participants in the meeting, not advisors, not consultants, not staffers in the wings who could potentially answer technical questions, provide research data, provide anecdotal evidence, or long years of experience. No. I could understand limiting the active participants, but then they limit it to parliamentarians because, you know, government can't be seen legitimizing Gary Griffith now. No, that will just make everything they said about the man for the last couple of years seem like, you know, horseradish. But anyway, the thing with the opposition is you have to determine to what extent now will you hold the opposition accountable for not compromising to the government. That is to say, we know you on games, but we will push forward anyway, despite the fact that it puts us in a disadvantaged position because this is an important situation, right? But we're not seeing that from the opposition. So this is a little bit more subjective, in my opinion. I would have loved to see the government get off its high horse for something of national importance. Unfortunately, you know, humility is something that the current administration, for the most part, not all of them, but many of them seem to be allergic to humility. Now, with regard to the opposition, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Get off your high horse. Okay, they're mistreating you, or at least you perceive them to be mistreating you. Some people will agree with that, some people won't. That doesn't matter. They have the majority. That doesn't matter. They're setting the agenda and limiting who can come in. That doesn't matter. You still go. So if it turns into a circus, you could say, listen, we disagreed with this, but we still came anyway in good faith, and then you turned it into a three-ring circus. We did all that we could do, right? It's all your fault. But the opposition can't say that now because they're hiding behind you. Well, we asked the Prime Minister for some confirmation. Well, it's kind of obvious what the Prime Minister is going to say, right? We know the temperament of the man. At the end of the day, unless something else changes, he ain't going to change his position just because you ask him what his position is to re-clarify an already stated position. What sense does that make? That is one of the weakest excuses of stalling the talks. Now, in hindsight, right, or 1 week removed from my interview with, or almost a week removed from my interview with the PRO of the UNC, but again, nobody is willing to give anything, give an inch. Everybody wants to do grandstanding, and it comes back to what I said, maybe 2 weeks ago. They're basically wanting to say, is the other side fault. That's it. That's what it comes down to. They're playing politics with your lives, right? Playing politics with your lives, what do you mean? Well, first of all, we already had now crime, random. It's considered a random crime. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was robbed at gunpoint on the road. Just gunmen came out from the vehicle in front of them, stopped her car, and robbed her and the fellow passenger in the vehicle. You know, so, hey, we don't need, Mr. Rowley, you don't need the opposition leader to go crying to the international community. The UN officials are being victims of crime at gunpoint. What can I say? And then, there's also the fact that, look, while it's not necessarily at the same level as last year, we reached 500, folks. We reached 500 in the murder rate. We still have a month and a half to go. A month and a half to go. We could get 100 in a month and a half. At least 90. So we might, you know, if this holds, we might actually be under 600. Woo! Yay, what a win. You think the commissioner will come out and, you know, bust out the confetti and the fireworks for that? Maybe the Minister of National Security? We only had 500 plus murders for the year so far. I mean, small victories, right? With this administration, small victories. Yes, I'm a little bit cynical this morning because this situation with the crime talks, it's very aggravating when basically what they're saying is your lives aren't important to us. Because just like how we could raise the price of gas and air riot anyway, you know, y'all could die in the hundreds. You ain't gonna riot anyway. It's fine. Paraphrasing the Minister of Finance, by the way. Now, meanwhile, second story. What makes this whole situation just... this is one where... This is a new one, right? Where I'm like, will this change the perceptions of how people think about our situation? I don't know. But if you haven't seen it in the papers this morning yet, a gentleman was killed after being released from a police station, just about right outside the police station. I think he was within the vicinity of the parking lot, which is right next to the police station. Apparently, he was being held. They didn't have enough evidence to keep holding him. And they released him from Belmont Police Station. This is one Mr. Kevin Bumble Moses. And it's always... It always takes me back to really ages, and I've reached the point where I'm older than even old criminals, because he's 28. That's old for criminal folks. That's old. He didn't expect to reach 28. Or at least there are many of his peers who might either didn't reach 28 or didn't expect to reach it either. So he's released from the prison, and apparently, and I don't know if this is just some made-up cover so that they don't look bad. I don't know, right? But apparently they asked if he wanted to call for a car. He said no, he'll walk. Regardless, he proceeds to walk out. And he didn't get to, it was what, maybe less than a minute, 30 seconds, something like that. And he gets gunned down, apparently with 5.56 ammunition. So he was gunned down with a rifle. 11 spent shells. I think they tried to take him to the hospital, because the hospital is right there, but for all intents and purposes, that sort of an attack, you would have to try to mess that up for it not to be lethal. So now the question comes, well, the commission has come out and said this is unacceptable. That's nice. It's nice that you see that, and I understand that. So the question is, how was this allowed to happen? How did this happen? What could have been done to prevent this from happening? First of all, it could have just been a situation where the criminals knew that he was in the police station and they waited for him without knowing how long it would have taken to wait. And it just so happened that he came out and they were ready and willing and they got him. Right? It could just be that. It could just be some criminals. One could say it's smart. They knew it was going to come out, only a matter of time. One could say it was dumb. They didn't know if the police were able to keep him or going to release him. Of course, that leads to the other speculation. It's a possibility they were tipped off that he was going to be released, and that's how they were there waiting on him. It's not guaranteed that it happened. It didn't have to happen that way. Of course, there's also the possibility of just dumb luck. Literally, just dumb luck. A couple of fellas catch up apps, they say they want to find this man, and they find him. And he took the risk of saying, I'm going to walk down a major road. Yes, in vicinity of a police station, but at some point you're going to, even if there was active police outside the station, at some point he's going to walk away from the station. So even a security presence, it would have necessarily prevented, an outside security police presence would not have necessarily prevented the murder. It would have just prevented the murder occurring more or less right on the police doorstep, which arguably some people might have said, well, that would have been better perception-wise. He would have still been dead though. Now, this is a case, apparently, of gangsters killing gangsters. So, to some extent, it's not the police's responsibility to provide him 24/7 protection. But the fact that it happened in front of a police station is just a new... Because they, they literally shot him. If you know the Belmont police station, the car park is right next door. It's not like around the corner or something like that. They literally shot him right adjacent to the police station. There was no consideration to the fact that, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill someone right next to a police station. There was none. So we've reached the point where old people, yeah, we could go after them. Children, yeah, we could kill them too. Deputy commissioners of a protective service, yeah, we could target them. I don't know if it was a luck that the guy just missed. He didn't even know who he was shooting at. I don't know. And then now, not even in front of our police station are people safe. This is 2023. This is 2023. Imagine if somebody said this in 1993. They would think you're mad, you're foolish, impossible. Next story, quick. And we'll wrap things up here, but I don't necessarily want to say about this. This is an ongoing story now, going back to an ongoing story with regards to TSTT. Apparently, the CEO, Lisa Agard, has been replaced. I believe officially it hasn't been said if she was fired or if she resigned. But I think the head of the communication workers unions believe that he was fired, and then was calling for the rest of the, was it the board or the executive? Was basically calling for more firings. I'm not entirely sure to what extent I agree with the firing, unless they have us smoking gun to say it was all her fault, right? Although they're not going to tell us that, for better or worse. But unless there was, you know, I would have preferred like a full investigation to be taken place, and then let's deal with everything. By replacing the CEO of the ACT, I do wonder if you get your scapegoat, because it's now about public perception, right? Especially with Southwest Regional Health Authority. Apparently they have a situation where they're trying to deal with a hacker that interfered with their records and is impacting their ability to service the citizens in the area. PriceSmart is also having an ongoing situation. Of course, there's courts that happened before, etc., etc. So I don't know if there was some sort of pressure. Well, hey, if we get a scapegoat, we scapegoat the CEO, and then we can make it all go away. Right? But the way how any large organization goes, yes, responsibility stops at the top, but responsibility is delegated down to multiple levels, and removing the person at the top, yes, in theory, that should help the situation. But we don't know to what extent part of the culpability was also in line with the delegated responsibility down to the various chain of commands that dealt with cybersecurity, if there was one. If there wasn't one, if management at the top was so bad that the whole thing just had no structure at all with regards to cybersecurity, well, fine. But my point is, there could also be people responsible for the TSTT situation still there. If this is a scapegoating situation, they'll more or less get off scot-free. So, I don't know. I mean, it's not as though it was a knee-jerk reaction that happened the next day, obviously. It's been a while. But apparently, the former CEO put out an apology in the papers over the weekend, and then yesterday, first working day after Diwali, she is informed that she is no longer the CEO of TSTT. I just hope this does not turn into a wrongful dismissal suit, but that's a whole other story. Folks, let's take a break. When we come back, we welcome the good lady herself here on Talking Point on WSN. Your content capital. We'll be right back.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Site, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movie Town, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing now, Andy.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. And I am joined once again, as we are every Wednesday, by the good lady herself, former Minister of Finance and legal scholar, Karen Shishera. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning to you, Sean. Good morning to your listeners. And yes, I missed you all. Whether you all missed me or not, I missed you all last week, but it could not have been helped, and I'm happy to be here today.
Now, Karen, about a month ago, you clued me in on this topic. There was an article a month ago, and it spoke about the struggles of the people in La Brea, but also you didn't just look at it when you were talking to me about it, about that one situation, but also a wider phenomenon that we might be experiencing where as development goes on, we're not necessarily maybe planning things out. There might be unintended consequences, some negative side effects to our development. One could argue what development, but there's a little bit, just a little bit now. And we don't necessarily do anything to compensate or even know what to do, and it might cause, as much as we want progress, it might cause other people to suffer from, a decline in their lifestyle.
Yes, I think we did speak about it, but probably I take a little different turn on it. And yes, you're right. The trigger for the conversation really was an article in one of the newspapers called "The Price of Progress," and we're talking about La Brea in particular. La Brea business hit hard as highway opened. So I want to say, first off, we applaud the opening of the highway. I am a Point girl. I lived in Point Fortin for my formative years. So I used to go to school for at least 3 years into San Fernando on that La Brea Pitch Lake Road. So I know the road pretty well as a young person. And so, of course it would have changed, but still the Pitch Lake is there and the road moves back and forth, up and down, so it's not that I'm unfamiliar with it. Although, of course, for many Trinidadians, once you pass the lighthouse, you start going south. Mm-hmm. So I probably was from deep south. But in any event, that's not the topic. The topic is really looking at the implications, and I want to say it from a broader perspective. You see, the broader perspective is that the building of the highway was not something that happened overnight. As a matter of fact, it didn't come to fruition until some time ago, and even then when it did, it took years to finally complete because of what's involved in building a highway. So the issue is that when you know that is what is happening, you have to know that there is going to be an impact on the residents of La Brea, because one of the consequences of that is that the highway cuts the time to go from San Fernando to Point and vice versa by about 40 minutes, but it bypasses La Brea. And therefore, you have to know that the 18,000 residents of La Brea would be negatively impacted unless some plan is put in place, not something we're going to do, we will do, we shall do, but something that you are putting in place immediately to alleviate the impact of the highway. And in fact, to even use the highway in a positive way to develop La Brea. But that is not the reality, because if we look and so I will just say that I looked at an Ernst & Young report just this morning, by the way, and they were looking at Trinidad and Tobago in terms of, they did a survey, and amongst one of the questions they asked was, were they satisfied with the level of the government's, I don't want to use the wrong words, but I think they were looking at how the government was progressing in terms of its development plans. Of the 80% who fell into the category of not confident at all, which is 23%, and not quite confident, which is about 50-something%, in total 80%. What was very telling, the number one, 75% of the respondents who fell into that 80 percentile category said that the number one concern was the lack of the government's medium to long-term national development plan. And so that is really the focus of LaBrie. LaBrie really illuminates, not in a very positive way, an example of the failure of the government to implement and enforce a plan in a timely manner so that the persons are not impacted in the way that LaBrie has been impacted. So I can talk generally what the report said, but it really brings you to the issue of LaBrie, the lake asphalt, and the number of reports that had been made. So just very briefly, they said that when you look at the report in the newspaper, when they talked about it affected the vendors, with the fruit vendors and the vegetable vendors, there's a National Petroleum gas station, 50% of the business has cut down. They said persons who sold sandwiches, barbecues, their sales have plummeted, and so on, which is that something you didn't think would happen? Of course you knew it was going to happen. I mean, that's an obvious thing. And if you didn't know it was going to happen, you had a joint select committee committee in 2019 who presented its report to the Parliament. And they recognized that LaBrie had to be dealt with because they recognized the impact the highway would have. And all those suggestions have not come to pass. One of the major suggestions was Airbnbs, the mall, building a mall that would cater to the tourists, because we know, or we should know a little bit about LaBrie having the largest naturally occurring pitch lake in the world. It's called the 8th wonder of the world. So Walter Raleigh apparently caulked his ships in 15-something there. So a lot of countries that build up their tourist industry on far less than what LaBrie has, the opportunities were there to do something. So they did offer alternatives, building up a mall. There is a museum, but enlarging and expanding the mall. There are tour operators, but even educating them more in terms of as a tour operator. Because anybody who has traveled abroad and gone on any tours in what you would call first world countries know that the tour operators, a lot of them are university lecturers who are on break, or university students. In other words, or persons who have been trained as tour operators to understand the area. So they did make that report in 2019 and nothing came out of it. But you also have to know that the Prime Minister had to have known it was a big problem, because in 2022, April 2022, I'm trying to find the exact wording of what he said, you know, because his understanding that LaBrie was going to be impacted by this development. I think in April 2022, I'm trying to find exactly his words. Oh yes, Prime Minister Rowley said, I think it was a meeting in Digicel, and he was talking about LaBrie. He said, we are going to fix it. We're going to fix that. We are going to create something sustainable in the LaBrie area for the LaBrie people and for the country of Trinidad and Tobago. And he said one of the reasons for the potholes is the lack of bitumen to pave the roads. It can't be imported, according to what he said then, because of the business model. We are dealing with that. So that's what he said. So what you do know from the Joint Select Committee meeting in 2019, from the statement of the Prime Minister in 2022, that they were very well aware that what the article in the newspapers wrote about was something they were very well aware was going to happen to LaBrie. And yet, what you have, because I was on another show, I should say, and I had persons who are very much involved in the public relations. They're involved, I don't want to call their names, they didn't give me permission to do that, but they certainly are very involved in trying to make a difference in LaBrie. And one of the persons also said they're tired of giving reports. They've done reports upon reports upon reports, going back years, making suggestions for development of a tourism sector in a really meaningful way for Le Bray. And whether it's a permanent secretary, whether it's CEO, whatever government agency, and to date nothing has been done. So this is just really another example. And I want to then go to the Lake Asphalt, because then Lake Asphalt really tells you how the lack of, well, now we know the highway, issue of the highway, but we could look at it as a positive. Yes, you're bypassing Le Bray, but also for those who want to be involved in tourist industry and become tour operators, it makes accessing Le Bray easier.
As well as other parts of southern.
Right, but I'm just, for today's purposes, I'm really focusing on the impact. So I said, why could they do that? Because they do have a connector road to Gonzales, which is in Le Bray, but it's near to their industrial Caribbean Gas Services Limited. So it is, Le Bray and that surrounding area is really very highly industrialized, but we know what the situation is with natural gas. But let me go to Lake Asphalt, because that then shows you again the lack of planning and the lack of it's either negligence, sheer incompetence, it's something, but it's not good. It's not good. So let's go to Lake Asphalt 1978 Limited. We have spoken about it before, but I don't think perhaps our listeners have a better understanding, and those who are experts in the area would have a better understanding. When they talked about bitumen, what I was not clear to me was that the tar or asphalt from the lake would have to go through some, I think they call them boilers, maybe not using the right terminology, but they would have to be boiled to a certain level. And in doing that, they would get trees, they would get even things from the Amerindians.
Right, debris and all.
But also Amerindian artifacts,
and
which could go.
And animal bones.
Exactly, right? They discovered that. But what would happen is that once you have done that, my understanding is that is not bitumen. Although one person said there is bitumen, but it's not of any, I can't question
It's
him.
a contaminant.
Right, but what I do understand is the flux oil, which came from the refineries, would be then bought by Lake Asphalt, and they would then combine that flux oil with the refined or tar asphalt to create the product called bitumen. So they didn't buy bitumen from Petrotrin. Bitumen was created by combining the flux oil from the refinery with the tar asphalt. And bitumen is so important because it accounted for 70 to 80% of the revenue of Lake Asphalt. And the Prime Minister himself said that's why we have so much potholes, because we don't have bitumen. So you didn't know that was going to happen, Mr. Prime Minister. And so you are now importing bitumen from places, from what I read, Suriname, Barbados, I think Jamaica, which apparently is not of the same quality as our bitumen. But more importantly, it has made Lake Asphalt 1978 Limited a ward of the state. And why do I say that? Because they pay the workers, about 200 workers, and $2.5 million is spent a month, according to another report in another newspaper. $2.5 million a month in paying the workers. They're not paying them when, in fact, your debt is over $10.5 million to date. You haven't had an audited account since, I think, 2017 or 2018. And the debt right now profile is over 10 million. So you knew this was going to happen. You knew it was going to happen. When you decided to close down the refinery, didn't you understand it would affect Lake Asphalt? Didn't you understand it would affect Le Bray? It's the same thing with the highway. Did you know that doing that would impact them? So couldn't you, I understand, although I cannot confirm it, but I was told by someone who lived in Le Bray all his life, and very active in Le Bray, said they were also promised a plywood factory. That hasn't come to pass. The mall hasn't come to pass. The Airbnb hasn't come to pass. All the tourism, building up the tourism sector in Le Bray has not come to pass. So you ask yourself, is this another example of why persons feel that they do not have confidence in the government's ability to lay out a clear and comprehensive national development plan. And, you know, it is really very disturbing when you read that. And the persons I spoke to who said it's not that not for lack of them putting forward plans, you know. They've put plans upon plans, and, you know, and nothing has come out of it. And so we see, and from my point of view, when I looked back at that article, it really was a trigger for me to say it's really a reflection of a lack of planning, a lack of looking at the consequences of the changes that you're making, and a lack of implementation. And it's very, I think, very, very disheartening that the government, it wasn't something that came to them like a thief in the night, that they couldn't prepare, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you didn't know this was happening. You knew it was happening. And you knew it was that you didn't, yet you kept telling people, and I was told in those interviews that they have put forward, they've had several committees set up, committees upon committees. That's what this government does. When they have a problem, set up a committee. You remember the Dr. Terence Farrell-led Economic Development Committee that was soon disbanded? Within a year and a half or so, everybody just fell apart. When they had the COVID issue, didn't they have some committee that was supposed to go and look into the problems in certain urban areas? I don't know whatever came of that. The answer is always a committee, or let us look into something. But you know, we're tired of looking into things, and I don't think you're ready. I know you said you're ready, but you're not ready. And I'm going to make a joke, and I hope we'll go. But I think I can't sing, but I do think there are lyrics that I can offer. And I think they should start their lyrics with, we will be, we are going to, we will be doing, we will be, but don't hold your breath. Something along that line. Because that, in my mind, and from what the government has shown, is the story of, and I have to say this too, many times, and you have to be fair too, is that oftentimes a concern is, of course, that you change, governments change so quickly.
Yes.
So you starting a plan, and one comes in, and then they come in and they throw it over, and they say we're going to do something differently, you know? And so then it doesn't progress. Well, this government has been there since 2015, and nearly the end of 2023. So how long is that? 8 years. And so therefore you've had 8 years, yes, 8 years in government that you can implement. You did implement the Caribbean Gas Services Company Limited, which was begun in January 2015, and it came to fruition in, I think, in 2020. But the employment, that's the other thing, the employment in that area, whilst there was a huge employment in the area for the construction part, as soon as it was constructed, I think it's the 8th methanol plant that was constructed, the first in that part of the southwestern peninsula, and they produced both methanol and DME, and which, don't ask me what, I can't pronounce DME, but that's what it's called, DME. But once the plant was constructed, most of the employees, because you need skilled workers, expert kind of workers that work in that thing, and most of them come from outside of Le Brie. So the traffic and the person who would buy the tamarind balls, the vegetables, the roti, they would still have customers. They would have had the customer base, and that has dissipated. But the point is, the bigger point is, you knew this was going to happen. This is my point. I think that's really the point. I'm just using Le Brie as a good example, I think, of both the Le Brie, the highway, and the Lake Asphalt issue with, I think they're producing what they call asphalt pellets. The asphalt pellets, they have a lot of, by the way, to recognize Lake Asphalt, they have about 20 patents, because there's a whole thing with the asphalt pellets. But asphalt pellets was not their main business model, nor does it make anything like what the bitumen produced for the company. Right. So, you know, it's just, and then I looked, let me just say this last thing, you know, then I looked, by the way, at Jamaica. It just doesn't have what we have, right? But they have a plan, I think it's called GSC, it's something Services Limited, I wrote it down, but it is being a 5-year plan that is being funded by the IDB. They can actually give you figures as to the progress with that initiative. There are 3 tiers. It is based on information technology, business processes, knowledge processing, 3 tiers. So it provides employment for different levels of education. It provides training. They have 62,000 persons involved in that sector, according to their permanent secretary that gave a report on an update. They have had, within the last year or so, over 1,500 new companies registered. It takes 3 days to register a company in Jamaica. So you ask yourself, if Jamaica, with far more challenges, I think, than we have, in a way, in many ways, if they are able to get their act together and create employment opportunities, not only for the medium, but for the small, medium, and at all levels, with an IDB assistance, if they have done that, why is something equivalent not happening in our country? And you know, it's really disheartening.
I think one of the issues with regards to this, here's another example that just came to me as you were speaking. So development, right? What have we seen, at least in a lot of the popular urban areas, particularly around the various valleys and hills in and around the Port-of-Spain area? A lot of construction happening. And then just generally speaking, a lot of construction and development happening around the urban centers in the country. And then
I didn't see it though, but maybe you have, but I haven't, because I live in the
I'm talking over the years, right?
Oh, over the years,
over the years,
now.
Right? And what have we seen? Well, not always has any consideration been given to drainage, and it's led to flooding. And what we could do now is just lament, oh gosh, we have no drainage, it's flooding. But at the end of the day, it seems as though we could complain all we want about the lack of planning, but we haven't actually done anything to prevent it from continuing to happen. So and then of course there's also building on floodplains, so that's besides the point. So yes, we want to develop, and yes, okay, listen, I enjoy Movie Town just like the next person, but was no thoughts put in with regards to could this impact the drainage of waters from the Woodbrook area? What about Port-of-Spain? We just built a capital city, right? That is not even necessarily popular with a significant section of the population, by the way, right? People go into Port-of-Spain because they have to, right, exactly. Exactly. Usually in a big city in abroad, there would be a downtown area or an old area that might, you know, not be so safe, and a safer area. But we don't have a safer area. We just have all unsafe. You know, the central bank is located, and like I'm sure there are many employees in the central bank who are not going to take a long walk anywhere from their workplace, right? At certain parts of the day at least.
That's very true.
So the flip side to that is, ironically, the concerns about the price of progress is also used against our development. Because whenever anybody brings up mass transit, one of the first excuses why we don't have a mass transit system, and a more comprehensive one is, well, what about the maxi drivers and the taxi drivers? And it's like, well, yeah, but we could incorporate, right? We could figure out, they could get, some of them are hired to drive the car, they don't even own the vehicle later. They could be hired to be part of the mass transit system as well. So I don't understand, Karen.
Can I give you a reason why that might be so?
Go ahead.
And I didn't mean to bring it up, but as you waxing on it, I want to hope I can find it, because a lot of the businesses we are talking about, like public transport, WASA, a number of the things that you're talking about, transportation, are state-owned, not so?
Yes.
Right. So,
well, not necessarily. Well,
what is not state-owned?
WASA, I wasn't necessarily talking about WASA.
I know you would, but
I have said over the last couple of weeks, it's a hell of a thing when we have parts of the country that haven't had water for weeks, while another part of the country floods.
It's not only that. It's not just that. It is highly subsidized by the state.
Yes.
It is a burden, just like how they're subsidizing the Lake Asphalt. There are so many entities that are state-owned that if they did not get subventions or whatever you call it from the state, they would go under.
Right.
So you ask yourself, why not divest yourself of some? Now, I am not one of those who have a clear position on that, but I will say this, that this is what, to your point, generally about, because the public transport service is state-owned, not so?
Yes.
Right, so in 2016, when Dr. Terence Fowle led, chaired committee, gave an executive summary report on July the 18th of 2016, he was talking about the divestment of 8 state-owned enterprises, one of which was Lake Asphalt, right? But this is what was very telling, and I suppose it answers part of what you were saying, why it's not happening. He said, in the minds of citizens, state enterprises are seen as mechanisms for dispensing political patronage, as inefficient and loss-making providers of services, or as providing employment for supporters of whichever party happens to form the government. So that may be part of the fact is that probably we don't have the money now. You know, things have gotten really tough, but I think part of the reason why we have WASA, the idea, the thing about having to rationalize, for example, WASA. Anytime they use the word rationalize, you know what they mean. They mean there are too many workers, and then it brings the question, if you have so many people doing this duplication and whatever goes on in state enterprises, then you have this report from none other than Dr. Terence Farrell, chaired committee, saying that in the minds of citizens, that is why. So you're going to have a lot of problem convincing the government to let go of its CPEP. And by the way, I am one of those, see that CPEP and URP does provide a benefit in the sense of a social benefit,
safety
right?
net.
Yes, because it's not much of a safety net, you see, because when you read, I don't know, I think it was 2021, they cut their salaries by 33 and 30%. When they were finished, they said they gave them 4 hours, 2 days a week, and it came down from $940 to $240. Now, I don't know what it is now, but nobody could even eat on $940 if it's that. So you have to understand where the recruiting from the gangs that we talk about comes from exactly that set of that group of persons, and this is where the government, in my respectful opinion, needs to do more, as Jamaica has done, to take a lot of these young people out of that seduction of being involved in that type of activity by taking them out of the CPEP, which can't mind them.
Yeah.
See, when you can't mind somebody on that, you have to understand they are going to find other means. And by the way, I'm going to mention it today. When you read, there was a report in The Guardian, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, they were telling you the price, the price of those guns. The price of those guns that they're using is things like $11,000 to $12,000. I have the figures there. They say the price of a bullet is 6 times the market value of this. Who is paying for that? People working for $140, and we have had an explosion of gangs in this country. The TPS has admitted to that. And it's coming from the urban centers. So you look at all of that, and you say to yourself, but if that is, you know all of that. You know the burden of having people in remand. You know the burden of having to buy the cost and the dislocation of funds to keep up a national security apparatus, which is based on the extent of crime in this country. What are you doing actively to take these young people out of that? CPEP and URP can be looked at as opportunities for political patronage.
I think what you said, right, with regards to the lack of development plans, right? And then when you look at the last couple of budgets, right, and you look at some of the commentary, where's the vision? What is the goal? What is the strategy? What is the overarching focus of this budget or last year's budget? Very similar remarks, right? Very similar budgets, you know, for all intents and purposes. And you have to consider, at least this administration, I think it's very reasonable to say that they've just been trying to play catch-up kind of defense. We're not really trying to do anything long to catch up. No, not catch up as in catch up as but the situation potentially is beyond their capabilities, and they themselves are just trying to keep up. They can't look down the road. They can't get ahead of the situation, right? And to some extent, I think this is the consequences of having very short-term thinking, not just with this administration, but for many administrations down the line.
We know that.
Right? So now the question is, how will the voters respond? Because it comes back to that, and I think we always come back to that. Some of our callers, myself, the next general election, what we're seeing, this is kind of short-sighted. Well, okay, well, we'll give a back pay here and we'll give more CPEP there.
That was the other story, whether they could pay the $1 billion. The Pullman's actually got herself in trouble, so we can't pay it till
got himself.
Himself, sorry.
Yeah.
There's so many women in the
I know, right? I can't fault you because I thought it was
yeah, but you know what you're saying, though? The thing about it is, the difficulty I have with all of that is that if you are running a company, which is Trinidad and Tobago, so we call Trinidad and Tobago a company, and you are the chief executive officer of this company, or chairman of the company, and you are getting data and information coming from your different CEOs, etc. You can't tell me that what has happened, you could not, I can't give them a pass, you see. I can't give them a pass.
No, well, in the business world, this would be a fail.
Yeah, but right, and I can't give them a pass because they have the resources are made available to them, and those resources are either disproportionately allocated to fighting crime, whether it is on different points of view, as well as failing to give alternatives, as Labre is a classic example of that.
Yes.
So I can't give them a pass because I can't say to them, oh my God, put their hands up in the air. You saw this coming down the pipeline. Now it has reached a point. You see, that's what happens, you know. You know, like you have a parent. The parents warn you, you know. They warn you. Continue like this, continue like this. This is what is going to happen. You harden, you don't want to listen. This is what has happened. You seeing it and you keep putting it off, and now it has reached a point, but you're right. It may have reached a point that they don't know what to do.
Well, I think I've always heard in the States that the American politicians would be looking at Social Security and, you know, it's fine now. They could see the problems down the road, but they don't want to touch it now. Because it's fine now. Let whoever is down the road deal with it down the road.
Kick the can down the road.
Kick the can down the road. And I feel
you deal with it.
It's very similar, but the problem is, at least now, the current crop of politicians might have to start realizing the can is no longer going down the road. The can is full with lead, and when we kick it, we're going to hit our foot. It's not going to go down the road anymore, right? The chickens have come home to roost. This whole passing it off to the next generation ain't going to work, right? And the thing is, we have to break, so I'll just say this. I don't know if we could, if things are going to work with the current situation as it stands with the two parties. I think we need a new condiment to mix up the recipe. But more on that after the break when we open the phone line. Stay tuned.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sierra Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. SRP shot once in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun. Scarborough Maxi taxi operators scolded for not collecting passengers. Repairs scheduled for a sewer pipeline on Charlotte Street. And regionally, Dominica created the world's first protected area endangered sperm whales, now for the Digicels. Investigations are ongoing into the murder of 56-year-old Special Reserve Police Officer Charles Kublal Singh. Kublal Singh, who was on extended leave, was shot once in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun mere moments after leaving a mini-mart on Woodford Street, QRAP, on Saturday night. His attacker then stole his gun and car. The incident occurred shortly after 8 p.m. Reports are that he had requested leave from duty after he became a witness in a murder case where one of his then superiors was charged. That matter is still ongoing. Maxi taxi operators came in for scolding criticism as they no-show to collect passengers at the Scarborough Port in Tobago on Saturday. While there was a lot of dancing at the Scarborough Port, pan music and moku jumbies, there was disappointment as pre-booked tours for 300 tourists were cancelled due to the non-arrival of maxi taxis. Head of the business chamber in Tobago, Martin George, has described the situation as unacceptable and insisted that Tobago needs to get its act together if they are to capitalize on the new season. Traffic restrictions are set to impact Charlotte Street in Port of Spain, specifically between Park and Oxford Street, as repairs are scheduled for a sewer pipeline. The Water and Sewerage Authority has issued an advisory indicating that repairs will take place from 4 p.m. on Friday, November 17th until 6 a.m. on Saturday, November 18th. Motorists are advised to exercise caution, follow instructions from traffic control officers on site, and consider alternative routes during the repair period. Regionally, Dominica is creating the world's first marine protected area for one of the Earth's largest animals, the endangered sperm whale. Nearly 300 square miles of royal blue waters on the western side of the island nation that serves as key nursing and feeding grounds will be designated as a reserve, the government announced on Monday. Dominica Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett said they want to ensure these majestic and highly intelligent animals are safe from harm and continue keeping our waters and our climate healthy. But that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sira Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen, and Karen Esther is here with me. We were just talking about the price of progress, looking at the situation in La Brea, but then also the wider situation where what development we do have tends to not always be the best thought out plans. And then we even have some things that we probably need, depending on your perception on our transportation network, that's being held up by the fact of we're afraid of the side effects and negative consequences. It seems as though we're just experiencing the bad parts about it both ways somehow, and we're not necessarily experiencing true development like some of our neighbors have seen, where they have maybe bitten the bullet, taken the hard measures. I know Jamaica, they've improved their road networks by having toll roads. And to me, that makes sense, because then now you could set up a system to say, all right, we're going to make a new road. It's going to be easier for people to drive in. There'll be a small toll. We have so many cars. It'll help pay for the road. But if you don't want to pay the toll, if all of that is too expensive for you and you have to maintain your own car, whatever, we have a public transportation system as an alternative as well that's functional. That's what works in New York. I think it works pretty well. Of course, the scale is different. But, okay, let's open up the phone lines before we continue the conversation, so you can call in and let us know what you think about this with regards to the situation in La Brea, with regards to development in the country in general, as well as the crime situation that I mentioned before, the stall crime talks, the fact that somebody was murdered more or less, not necessarily right in front of a police station, but almost right in front of a police station. Now.
Following one that was just up the road.
Right, that was, okay, yes, that's true, that was just up the road.
Up the road.
Just up the road.
In no matter of a few days. Because I live in that area. And
exactly.
So, you know what I mean? And you just feel, and by the way, even where I live, is really, the Commissioner of Police is really right about, home violence. Because where I live, we feel very secure. And anyway, someone's calling from St. Anne's. Okay.
Good morning, caller, you're on the air. Caller, good morning.
Good morning. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to note something you said a little while ago, a few minutes ago, about needing a new condiment in the spray of politics in this place. Honestly, and I'm saying this not as a member of the PNM or as a supporter of the PNM, but clearly, if you look back at the history of this place, this is PNM country. The PNM is essentially the government in waiting. I don't think any other party can say that legitimately. The third-party forces that have come along in time have either invariably collapsed or been co-opted. I don't have any faith that third parties are the way. It's a two-party race, and the PNM typically comes out in front. With regards to Mr. Alexander, who has seen it fit to withdraw from the PEP, I said last week that he is great at capturing the angst, the anger, the disappointment, that and the rage that a lot of citizens face or feel about governance in this place. And where he got it wrong was that just in that capturing that rage also says something about your lack of information about what it takes to run this place. When the NAR came into power, as I said last week, with their 33-3 majority, a lot of people thought that by virtue of that majority, they would have been able to do whatever they wanted. The reality was that in the upper house, they had both the independents and the PNM lying in wait to either give them some degree of opposition or forestall any of their great plans. When you get into that political infrastructure, it is difficult, if not impossible, to do the radical changes that you wish to accomplish. This place is a slow grind, and the PNM has found a magical way to work it to their advantage.
And I want to respond to that because, you see, one, that's very cynical. I mean, you might say it's a realistic one. I would say it's cynical because if one takes that position, then we might as well give up all hope and just let them do whatever they want. And this is exactly what is happening in the country because having been inside a cabinet, I know, I am confident that a lot of what we're seeing is happening and the decisions that are being made are being influenced by those who are outside the cabinet. And I believe that those interests are not our interests, but the interests of a very small majority, which is not the rule of a government. And just from my own little experience the other day, just if I could draw from a small experience I had to go, which is why I wasn't here last week, I had to go up to New York urgently. And downtown Brooklyn, many years ago, I had gone downtown Brooklyn, and I was shocked at the state of downtown Brooklyn. I was familiar with Nostrand Avenue, Eastern Parkway. You know, we know people who Flatbush. A lot of us who have family Nostrand Avenue and so on. I was so shocked. It was such a disgrace, and most of the people living there were people from the Caribbean. I said, my God, they come here and look at what they're doing, how they're representing us. And the point I did make, I want to finish that point, is that the people were told, if you do not take out citizenship in America and just hold on to your citizenship of your original country, they're not going to take you on, they're not going to collect your garbage, etc., etc. Yeah. I went back there this last week and I was shocked. It was as if it was a renaissance. The people had taken out their citizenship, they had children who had become American citizens, and therefore they could vote. They had the power of the index to vote, and it was like a complete metamorphosis of down. I was in shock. I went all the way down to Brooklyn College, where one of my family members had gone to. And if that is any indication that something could change, I had that experience last week, so I'm sorry, sir. If you want to hold on to that thing, then we have to think that Trinidad is a lost cause.
I think it's not that he wants, but I understand why he said it. I don't think he wants it that way, but we have a caller from San Fernando.
It sounded like he wanted it that way, if I have to see.
Morning, caller. You're on here. Hello?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
What is San Fernando?
You know, that's a great topic, by the way. That's highway extension. Well, first off, Karen, didn't that start off as the Sir Solomon Hochoi Highway extension to Point 14?
I'm not sure.
However, the Solomon Hochoi Highway has not touched that road because they had stopped the highway when they reached the Davie, and it was not continued till where the Mondesi interchange is supposed to be. That was the connection. So you would have been able to drive from Port of Spain or from the north straight down the highway, straight to Point 14, without actually having to come, because now you have to come into San Fernando.
Yes.
On the outskirts of San Fernando to get into that to come onto that road to go down the creek to go down to Point 14. Now, as you said, that highway has really affected that area. I own property in that area. It has affected from Oropouche straight to Labrie. So we have a little part of Oropouche. We have Rosilac. We have Aripero. We have Dow Village. It has affected that entire, because I have actively, since they have opened, since they cut the ribbons some weeks ago, I have actually sat down on the main road with a couple of persons, and we have looked at the traffic. We have spoken to people in the area, business people, and I know some of the business people in the area. It has greatly affected business in that area, because once you don't have the taxis coming up, because everybody taking the highway now, it has greatly affected economic activity on that road. However, let me go to Labrie. The Labrie community, Karen, and I'm calling them out. The Labrie community has not performed as they should for an area that has seen economic activity surrounding it. They lack the capacity, in my opinion, to produce anything beyond, in a meaningful way, anything beyond basic construction workers. That's a fact. So anything goes on in the area, you have some construction, and after that phase is finished, there is nobody or very little Labrie community persons that get employed in that entire industrial area that they have there. And I keep asking myself, what is the situation here? Because Labrie has no right to be suffering, you know. That industrial area, they have a lot of companies inside there. That people come from the outside. And a lot of them don't come from Labrie. The Labrie community has to lift itself up. Let me tell you something. The state, the government has tried a lot in that Labrie community in terms of those programs that they have with YTEP and NESC. They have tried, and it has not produced what it should. It has not borne fruit. So there is a lot of blame on the Labrie community themselves. Let me say this. However, the state has patronized that community by saying, okay, the last thing they told them is that they were going to build this shipyard, which would have taken up it's about almost 1,000 acres of space, going back from Labrie, going all the way back to behind Harry Pero there. And that has not come to fruition. So Labrie has been languishing, and now that road has extended the hardships to the other communities going back to San Fernando on that old road. Let me tell you something, Karen. I have sat down there, and in 1 hour time during the day, you had less than 50 cars passing on that road. It is that bad.
Yeah, but I think
that's bad.
I just want to maybe to be clear
and all I have to say is that people have to find their own way in this morass, and the Labrie community and those other communities have to find alternative ways of getting themselves out of this. This is not something that the state can do. The road is already there, and that's the way it is.
I just want to say that I do agree. We do agree, and I do agree that Labrie has to help itself, but Labrie also has to be helped. I don't know that any community that does not get facilitation by the state. I don't think that, and you made a good point about a lot of the people there are not qualified, which is why doing the tourism, having tourism and the Airbnb and having those types of things which do not require a high skill set would be good for that area. And also the reason why much of the personnel who work in those industries there come from outside of Labrie, because they have the much higher level of education. So something is wrong that you have not done the planning to prepare them. You can't put, I'm not putting everything on the government, but the government, that's what a government is there for. A government just not just is there, you put them there to facilitate. Now, if you're telling me they facilitated the development and tourism sector, they took the Joint Select Committee report and actioned it. If you're telling me that they put up the plyboard factory for those who are not that qualified in the higher skills, if you're telling me they're doing that, I'd say, okay, but you're not telling me that.
The thing is, and Cole, I understand what you said when the government has tried to use programs and stuff. I do find that more often than not, whenever there's an education program to try to help a community, an industry, a demographic,
they have done that.
But I rarely see the large-scale success in those endeavors, right? Yeah, you can have anecdotal success, that's fine. But when you have a large-scale program, you need large-scale results for a proper return of investment because it's taxpayers' dollars that's more or less financing these things,
you have to do a match. I know he's right about the NESC, they did a lot of training, but you've got to do the matching. You've got to match the skill sets with the needs of the community. So that whilst I agree, right, so whilst I do agree that LeBray residents have to take some responsibility, that role of government is not to be a babysitter for the people, but it certainly is to be a facilitator, and I am not seeing that happening there.
Because we saw the same thing with Gates, right? Where we just, okay, people are educated seemingly at random at whatever whims and fancies they have, and it didn't necessarily translate to a growth in the skill set and the labor force skills in our job market, because the job market didn't adjust. Didn't make any adjustments, and the education systems didn't adjust to suit the job market. It just was, right? We already, before Gates, we already had chemical engineers and so forth being graduated from the University of West Indies. So that sector didn't necessarily need a greater influx of people. Right now we have an issue with doctors and their situation, which you know of firsthand. But I think one of the things that it comes back down to is opportunity. It's not just, you could train someone all you want. If they have an opportunity in that industry, then the skills goes to waste. The money spent to train them goes to waste. The time spent to train them goes to waste.
I'll give you a good example. Ireland. What they did with their teeth, they had the equivalent of International Financial Center. And they were in terrible straits. And there was one man who was a dreamer, apparently got himself in trouble at the end of the day. But he did pushed for the International Financial Center. The bottom line was many Irish young people who had left Ireland because of lack of opportunities returned to Ireland to build up their International Financial Center. So it has to be that when you are doing you have to provide opportunities. So it has to be a match between the two.
But I hate to say this, but I don't really see in government, at least within the last 20 or so years, right? Or maybe 10 years, right? I don't see the vision. Especially now with the current crop that we have, maybe some of the young ones who can't speak, maybe they might have it, but
they won't be allowed to speak.
That's a hope, you know, that's pure speculation. The vision, because attempts to make and create opportunities also tend to not pan out. They tend to, you know, be dead in the water before they even begin. We have our St. Anne's again. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call again. I just wanted to call back to make one comment about something that Karen said about my call. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
She mentioned two things about my contribution. One, that perhaps I was cynical, and the other one that I was happy or content with the situation as it existed, and speaking of my frustration. She wasn't right about me being happy about that. I am cynical because I've seen a lot of governments in this place come and go. I've seen a lot of promises made, including by the government that she once served in. And I've seen a lot of malappropriation and maladministration and corruption, again, including the government in which she served in. I just wanted to go back to say this. When I first voted at the age of 18 in this country, I was sure that I was doing the right thing for myself, my family, my community, my nation. Over the intervening years, that wavered into, and decades I should say, that wavered into lesser of two evils. After 2010, I had to come to the sad conclusion, they're all evil, and I haven't voted since, because nobody seems to take this thing about governance right. They all seem to have their own hidden agendas, and when they finally get into that place called power, we see a turn. And I don't know what the solution is. I keep having hope that somebody will come along and finally speak to the people rather than speaking down to the people about what they want to accomplish here. I'm hopeful. I'm not completely gone into the place of this place is over, it's dead, it's gone.
Okay,
but
that's good.
To say that I like it the way it is a bit much for me.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll take back the like it the way it is. Just it seemed, it was cynical, and
I am cynical. I admit to that.
Okay, and I don't think that sometimes. Let me just say this, and you know, I tried very hard not to be defensive, and I may come across like that. But it's always easier for people to make an assessment of when you're on the outside as opposed to when you are on the inside. For example, I'll just use one example. And I understand what you said, and I understand why you would feel that way. Of course, I may have a difference of opinion on some things, but that's because I probably am biased, which I would admit to that. But the thing about it is, I give an example with the education. You know, I remember that the Prime Minister Manning at the time said we have to bring Trinidad to a knowledge economy, and so he ratcheted up the education. He knew at that time he just needed to get us up to a certain point. So there was a UTT, there were night classes at the University of the West Indies, there was VIMCOT, there was COSTAT, Arthur Lockjack, the private institutions, and we had reached a point that was in the cabinet at the time. I said, okay, we've achieved what we want to achieve. We've gotten people up to a certain point. But now we've got to make sure we make a match, because we can't have people running around with degrees in political science, social studies, and their only alternative is to go and teach or to go and have to do their masters.
Yeah, because eventually,
right? But we were doing the International Financial Center, and if you know anything about an International Financial Center, what they're huge is in accounting services, legal services. They also have backroom operations, and so that a lot of our people that had been trained up in these different fields were intended for the International Financial Center, which unfortunately with the global financial crisis and the loss of business, loss of government, did not come to fruition. So what I'm trying to say to you, sir, is that it's not as you know, the impression one gets as if everything is done in a very Vicky-Vi way without any sort of planning. There was a plan, unfortunately it never came to fruition, but that was part of the plan, and that's that. But I understand the cynicism, and if I've said that you like it so, I certainly did not mean that to come across that way. It just seemed as though you had given up, and I hope that you will not do that.
The thing is, it's important to note, yes, that administration was cut short. So it's already difficult with a 5-year term to see long-term planning implemented, you know, because you have to actually come up with the plan. So you can't be on the outside of government, right, and be ready to go to plan literally on day one. You need to get the information now. Once you get access to everything, see the resources, plan ahead to the future, then implement the plan. It's going to take some time, and you all barely had enough time there. But I will say this though.
Yeah.
At first, I would have thought, and this is what makes me so upset with what's going on in Tobago. Because what we saw in Tobago, right, Tobago did not vote on a third party, technically, but they got a new second party. So they already were taken seriously by the voting public, being one of the top two, right? And the public was willing to say, listen, we are going to replace the old guard with a new guard. That's a good point. Now, there's two issues why that's not going to work in Trinidad, at least not anytime soon, I think, or will very much make it unlikely. The first one is the basic fact that, look, I don't know if anybody could look and say the experiment with the PDP was a success. It didn't even last 2 years before we already saw some major issues. Now, maybe the Chief Secretary and the TPP will turn things around. But the problem is, you don't necessarily believe all the rumors you hear, but when you get those whisperings, there's enough truth in them to make you think this is not a good sign. It doesn't have to be 100% true, but it's going in the wrong direction. I don't like how this sounds, and it's not as though his public face and front of their new party is doing anything to dissuade the non-diehard supporters that there's no truth there.
I just want, because we only have a little time, just want to say that the price of progress, which is the heading for this topic, is hard. We are only 60-something years in existence as a nation. And then we came as a nation of people who either were former indentured laborers or former slaves. In other words, we didn't come from a collective of persons who came from higher education.
And so we have a collective identity.
Exactly, and the educational levels, right? Much of the schools and hospitals and roadways and highways that we have today are that we created it. And we are comparing ourselves with countries that are thousands, hundreds of years. You don't think they had battles?
Exactly.
You don't think they had Bastille Day in France that they celebrate? America, they celebrate their War of Independence. You don't think every country goes through? And right now in America is still going through a sort of thing. Every country is going to go through a thing. But the point is, you can't just sit back and say, oh, well, that's how it is, and we just give up. If you do that, yes, you're right.
Well, exactly. But
you're right.
But there is a practical application, because when St. Anne's called, I actually said, you know what, maybe he's right. Maybe, as much as the implementation might not be the best example, the concept of what happened in Tobago, where one of the two parties is replaced.
Exactly.
But what makes it trickier in Trinidad is because the parties are divided by race.
Very much
so. If you, which one you're going to replace? Now, based on his weight, it's going to be harder to replace the PNM just outright.
Absolutely.
But how now are you going to tell? Because it's not as though the East Indian community see a home in the PNM, right? Not a lot of them do. So how now are you going to tell all those voters, well, hey, the UNC, we had to scrap that and,
but you know,
and get replaced with something else.
Floating voters. And that is why it happened that we were able to have what we had. We have had opportunities where you've had that forging of two parties together, which did not work. You had the NAR with the 30, which did not work. But that's part of progress. And so we have to give ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes and to continue to grow, because that is you can't make steel without going through fire. And we have to go through the fire to create the steel, because if we are not prepared to do that, we will get what we deserve.
Which is not much, right? So far.
Right, that's what I think.
But this leads me to the final point. Okay, it might be cynical to say there will be no third party. My issue is no one has fully committed in trying to create a third party yet. No one. Everything falls short. The NAR more or less disbanded, disintegrated after they got voted in, and they disintegrated. Now they got voted in technically as a number 2, not as a number 3. The COP, they had their first election, they got no seats, but then they got seats in the second election, and then they joined with the partnership, which that in and of itself wasn't the issue, but they themselves eroded their own core values for political expediency.
That is true.
And I think, look, Philip is more or less saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Part of the problem is most people that go into politics are ambitious and they want to sit in the chair. And the thing is, the first generation...
Only one person can sit in our chair.
Well, not only that, but there's a good chance, depending on how you start, that the first generation ain't going to see all that success, but they will pave the way for their successors.
There you go.
But which ambitious politician cares about that? They don't care about that. They care about their own ends. So I think that is the issue.
Well, let's not make please don't make such a broad statement.
Well, so far, with the ones that we have seen enter into elections and right, because no one else has a track record. Philip went into elections and it didn't work out, right?
And he got sued a lot of times for defamation.
So exactly. So folks, we have to end here, but I'll just say this, as Karen said. Well, first of all, thank you, Karen, for coming on the show.
Oh, God, I love coming on. I enjoy it very much. And I love your callers when they call in. They make such really good contributions and make me have to think over some of my own views, and I thank them for that too.
And I want to thank all the callers, and I'll end with what I was going to say. Karen, you said it. You know, it's hard. It's not easy. No. It's not easy, but it seems as though our history suggests we like to take the easy route. And this is not unique to us, folks. No. It's not unique to us. No. But at the end of the day, if we want today to be a good day, and for our coming days to be great days, we have to start today. We could do it if we try, as my coach always says. But with that, we'll see you tomorrow morning. Goodbye.
WESN.
I'm Andre Elbertis, and you're watching WESN, the content capital.
My name is Carl Media, and I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We the police officers, we are professional and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, it's for all of us in public.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing on it.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is it no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, Bmobile 107, Digicel 21, ICNTT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
also, we will not know until after Israel enters the compound, the extent to which there are civilians inside or the extent to which these are mostly terrorists.
I just want to clarify something that you mentioned there. You said the IDF had managed to move some babies into incubators. Based on the information we have, at least here in the newsroom, Israel said yesterday it was coordinating to try and move those babies, but based on our current understanding, that hasn't happened for the moment.
Just to clarify, what I meant was that Israel provided evidence that it had brought incubators into Gaza, and at that point, the doctors and nurses inside Al-Shifa hospital actually moved the babies to a different area within the hospital. They released, Hamas released video footage of the babies being moved by doctors and nurses, and I think one was being held by a small child, actually, into another area of the hospital where there was electricity provided. So I think what we're seeing is that the IDF is trying to provide ways to evacuate or to not harm civilians, but that does not mean that civilians will be perfectly safe within that compound. Of course not, because this is a war, and many of those civilians are being held as human shields in there.
Thank you for clarifying that point on the incubators. I appreciate what you're saying, that we still need to wait to see what happens, what evidence will emerge in the coming days and weeks out of Al-Shifa. But when that does, is there a possibility that Israel and or Hamas have committed war crimes at Al-Shifa?
There is always a possibility that war crimes have been committed. And even if these are not war crimes, we know that there is grave destruction and death that is occurring on both sides in this conflict. The question really is around proportionality. And within international law, it says that the proportionality means proportionate to the aim or the objective of the war being waged. That aim or objective is firstly to free the hostages that were kidnapped and taken into Gaza on October the 7th, and secondly to root out a terrorist organisation that has said in its charter and repeatedly said since this war began that its aim is to destroy Israel. Now, the proportionality principle does not mean that it's okay for civilians to be harmed. And the IDF, which is part of a liberal democratic nation, must uphold the principles of international humanitarian law and must try wherever possible to minimize any harm or suffering of the civilian population. And it is that which we simply will not know until after this war is over. There can be much speculation about it. We know that there is a war on social media from both sides and people producing videos and evidence, some of which is from this war and is from today, and others of which have been debunked as being from other wars and other contexts. But we really will not know until after the war is over and an investigation happens.
Professor Rosa Friedman, unfortunately we're out of time, but I want to thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis.
Thank you.
Well, staying with this story, as Israel pushes on in Gaza, a France 24 team has been granted limited access by the Israel Defense Forces to film inside of Gaza as part of a press trip with the IDF. This report was filmed by our Jerusalem correspondent Claire Duhamel with Iris Makler on Sunday.
Israeli flags fly over the ruins of Gaza. In this village in the northeast of the Strip, Israeli soldiers storm every house. They claim they've destroyed Hamas tunnels nearby and now control the area.
He's saying, don't take a picture of me because my wife doesn't know I'm here. She'll be so worried if you know I'm here, so don't take a picture of me.
In Gaza City, Israel combines a ground offensive with airstrikes. Civilians flee the massive bombardment. Thousands of Palestinians, including many children, have been killed over the past 5 weeks. There's only one way to get into the Gaza Strip as a foreign journalist, and that's with the Israeli army.
We have all kind of threats when we hear mortars, drones. You'll see on my head of the APC right above you, there is some kind of a roof. This roof is made to protect the soldiers inside from drones, from RPG drones.
From this armoured vehicle, you don't see the devastated landscape. But when we reach the suburbs of Gaza City, the dust clears and the scene is apocalyptic. Thousands of civilians are fleeing south, some on horse-drawn buggies, others on foot waving white flags. This Israeli sniper watches, on alert for an ambush by Hamas fighters who might have infiltrated the crowd.
So you call that a humanitarian corridor, but some people... Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone. Some people are saying that it's a war zone broad good corridor, but forced displacement. Forced displacement.
Yeah, you could call it forced displacement, but at the same time, we didn't invade them on the 7th of the 10th. They invaded us. We're doing the best we can to help them while securing our goals. Our goals are getting our people home safe. So we're always talking about proportionate response. There's no proportionate response in war.
The army fears that some of the 240 Israeli hostages are being hidden in this crowd. So they regularly call out in Hebrew. We're forbidden to advance ahead of the soldiers to the Palestinian civilians. So the only way to hear their stories is to call on Palestinian journalists based in Gaza. One of them sent us these images shot the day before. They show Israeli airstrikes in the distance. These exhausted civilians feel they're re-experiencing the trauma of 1948, when over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from their lands during the creation of the State of Israel, a dispossession known as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic.
Where can we find shelter? There are thousands of homeless people, including children, women, and people of all ages. Some have perished in the streets. Others lie helpless on the ground. Who can we turn to but Allah?
Back in Israel, we submit our images for military censorship, which was a condition of this shoot. The IDF approves all images broadcast to ensure, they say, that they don't endanger their soldiers. But none of what was said in this report, none of our questions or the soldiers' answers were checked.
Now in other world news, the army in Mali has seized back control of a major rebel stronghold in the north of the country. The city of Kidal had been held by Tuareg separatist groups for several years, posing a challenge to the sovereignty of Mali's military rulers. And the Tuaregs have long accused the central government there of neglect and have been pushing for independence. To tell us a bit more, Wasim Nasser from our terrorism desk is with me in the studio. And Wasim, first of all, what's the latest today on the ground in Kidal?
Well, actually, we know that yesterday, forces of the Malian army, special forces, and of Russian mercenaries Wagner succeeded into getting into the town of Kidal, and we're going to see a map where we see how did they proceed to enter the city. So the latest fight was in Al-Kid, and then they went through, as we see on the red arrow, south of Kidal into the MINUSMA facility, the United Nations forces who left the town actually a few days back, and then into the town. And we have footage where we see Wagner operatives in their vehicles here, as we see, cheered by some people in the street of Kidal, which confirms that actually they are in town. And what's interesting is there was no fight in the town between the Malian army, Wagner on one side, and rebel Tuareg faction on the other side, because, as I was told, they decided to leave the town without a fight, meaning also with part of the civilians living in the town.
And do we know how the military campaign got underway?
Actually, the military campaign was ongoing since weeks, where the Tuareg tried many times to counter the advance of Malian forces, and we're going to have two footage from Aklit. That was Saturday on the 11th, and we see that they succeeded to stop the convoy on the road that we saw before the RN18, which pushed actually the forces to go around the road yesterday. So here they stopped the convoy, they destroyed some vehicles, but what's mostly interesting is if we look at another footage that we have, we know that Malian forces used drones, Turkish drones, and here's the rare footage of a drone hitting Tuareg rebel forces in another area, but it's the only footage where we have evidence of this, knowing that the Tuareg succeeded in downing many planes and many helicopters, but it's difficult for them to count on drones. And this is why Malian forces concentrated their effort on Anefis to make it capable to be next to Kidal, to make the use of drones possible against forces there. And this is what pushed also Tuareg forces who lost many vehicles and men to leave Kidal without a fight. But what we should know also that they tried to counter Malian forces since weeks. We have footage of Bamba that we see here on the map, where fighting occurred. We have fighting in Buram, also in Anefis. And this is fighting of what we see here is Bamba. But actually, at the end of the day, Tuareg forces weren't able to coordinate between the front on the east and the front on the west, and which is mostly important in the fight of Kidal, that all along those weeks and months of fighting, we had also Al-Qaeda getting into the fight from its side and hitting Malian forces, hitting Wagner forces. The particular thing about Kidal is since the 15th of October, Al-Qaeda didn't get into the fight. So I asked why Al-Qaeda didn't get into the fight. And actually because they consider Kidal as a very important bastion of the rebel forces in Mali, and losing Kidal will mean for Al-Qaeda more recruitments in its rank instead of rebel factions who, as Al-Qaeda says, are divided and are on a fight which is more of interest than for liberation, as Al-Qaeda says.
And just a final question. We know this is a strategic win for the Malian army. How do you think this will affect the military government there now?
Well, actually, it's a win because that's one of the most important objectives of Bamako since the second coup d'etat, at least, taking back Kidal. They succeeded. It's a communication stunt, but militarily on the ground the situation will still be difficult. Kidal isn't important militarily. Tessalit is, where Malian forces also on the border with Algeria. And here we see the fighting in Asharan. So as I was saying, between Al-Qaeda and Malian forces, the fighting was very hard between Al-Qaeda and Malian forces in other areas. This is the area of Tombouctou. So this fight will go on, actually, in other areas. And mostly we have to know also that this is also Al-Qaeda fighting Wagner forces. The drone footage is Al-Qaeda footage, actually. So they have enough means to fight the Malian forces and Wagner forces, which they decided not to use in Kidal. And there's a real impact also on civilians. So we have a very rare footage about civilians who left the area of Kidal and went to the border with Algeria in Tinazawatan. And we see that those people who left their towns are in a very critical position, and they can be used by one party or another into the upcoming fight. So it's a period which is ending. Rebel factions lost. It will change the equilibrium politically and socially in Kidal, of course, but this does not mean the end of the war.
All right, thank you for your analysis. As always, Wasim Nasser for us there. Now, it's a hot spot for drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and thus also for violence. Today, we report from Mexico's most southern state, Chiapas, where gun warfare between two rival criminal groups is spiraling out of control. Our team in Mexico have traveled there with the military, and they've sent us this story.
We approach the border with Guatemala under military escort. This part of Chiapas is the heart of a turf war between Mexico's two most powerful cartels. Signs of violence are all around. Buildings scarred by large caliber bullets and abandoned houses. Roadblocks previously controlled by criminal groups have given way to army checkpoints. Their presence brings relative calm. Lorries, which cartels use to smuggle drugs, weapons and migrants, are systematically checked.
They build false floors into the trucks. Sometimes they hide migrants behind products. All the migrants that pass through here these days do so via human traffickers.
We arrive in the municipality of Frontera Comalapa. The Sinaloa cartel entered here triumphantly a few weeks ago after dislodging their rivals, Jalisco Nueva Generación. In these images, heavily armed men parade through the streets while locals applaud. This scene takes place just a few kilometers from where the National Guard was stationed.
Was there a security breach?
No, I wouldn't say that. We're constantly moving around this area that we're assigned to. Sometimes when we arrive in conflict areas, the organized criminal groups don't wait for us. They hide or retreat.
Since the 29th of September, nearly 800 soldiers have been deployed here to restore order. While the soldiers are here to bring calm to the situation, the town remains unsettled. Our camera makes people nervous.
No, there's nothing to ask. I don't know anything. Everything's fine here. Everything is fine.
Are you afraid that the same thing will happen again if the army pulls out?
Yes, I think so, because things are very tense here. People are afraid. Outsiders don't come here anymore. It's very sad for the people here.
3 hours from this border area lies San Cristobal de las Casas, a colonial city nestled in the mountains. The pearl of the state is popular with tourists, but isn't spared from the growing insecurity. Near the market in the north of the town, armed groups recently faced off with heavy weaponry during the night. There were no casualties this time. The next morning, anguished traders opened their stalls.
We locked the door and stayed at home. We weren't going to head out while shots were being fired. The whole thing lasted 20 minutes.
Were you scared?
Yes, of course. I didn't want to open my store this morning, but all my produce is here.
The first time there was a shooting was almost a year ago. That's when it started.
In the historic city centre, tourists brush off the shooting.
We didn't hear anything.
We're here for 2 days. This evening we'll sleep in the town, and tomorrow we take the bus to Palenque.
I'd heard that the security situation was a bit less stable than it was, but I was told there's nothing to worry about as a tourist.
European tourists are drawn to Chiapas largely because of the legacy of the Zapatista movement. In 1994, an armed insurrection led by Subcomandante Marcos seized several towns and demanded autonomy for indigenous people.
Para obtener el reconocimiento constitucional de los derechos y la cultura indígena.
29 years later, and the radical left movement has just announced it will disband some of its political structures in the face of the rising violence. In Mexico's poorest region, indigenous communities regularly clash. Sometimes conflicts end fatally. Catarina was expelled from her village along with 54 families 6 years ago, following a run-in with the new local government. She has lived in these huts ever since.
They shot at us. Unfortunately, 2 people died, including my uncle, Don Guadalupe. The pain is still there. The heart never heals completely. I still feel his loss.
Soldiers, paramilitaries, and political movements. A social fabric in which organized crime can embed and grow.
One of the cartel strategies is to co-opt the region's organizations. They focus on the border regions in particular. They want to extort and threaten, but they also want to build a social base.
Chiapas has a complex geography and a thorny political history. The state is fertile ground for sowing terror with impunity. Over the last 2 years, 7,500 people have been displaced.
And that report by our team in Mexico brings us to the end of this hour of Live from Paris. Thank you for watching, and do stay with us.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com.
They're known for their cuisine and saying hello with a kiss. They only work 35 hours per week, when they're not on strike, that is. How true are these clichés about France? Every week, Florence Villeminot tears apart stereotypes. Join us for insight into French culture and current events to understand what makes the French so unique.
French Connections, presented by Florence Villeminot on France 24 and France24.com.
now. I know how to fight now. I got country and respect the area.
Welcome to one of the world's most flammable ecosystems. Here in northern Australia, the Aboriginal people have been managing wildfires their way for millennia. And now, with climate change, a lot of other nations are watching closely.
South Australia, we had big fire, and now they're thinking scientists, bushfire people, they're talking with Indigenous people how to work together.
Indigenous people facing climate change. A series of reports on France 24.
Israeli troops inside Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital. The army says it's carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas, but medics concerned about the fate of hundreds of patients trapped in the building. Well, amid the war in Gaza, we head to the Israeli city of Ashkelon to meet Holocaust survivors caught up in this latest conflict. And also in the programme, no green light for the UK government's Rwanda plan. The controversial policy to send asylum seekers to East Africa slapped down today by the Supreme Court. Hello, you're tuned into France 24. I'm Nadia Massi with the headlines. Our top story. Israeli soldiers have entered Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital this Wednesday, where hundreds of patients are trapped. Witnesses say the troops are searching its emergency department and basement after the army described the hospital as the beating heart of Hamas operations. That is a claim being denied by the militants. Now, what is clear this Wednesday afternoon is that the humanitarian situation at the hospital is desperate. The United Nations has said earlier on this week that thousands of people were sheltering there without electricity and basic medicines. Health officials say a number of patients, including newborn babies, have died. Matthew Mary Karushit has our first report.
The Israeli army continues its extensive ground operations in northern Gaza, scouring every nook and cranny to eradicate Hamas. On Wednesday, Israeli forces entered Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, after days of sieges and gunfire. Hamas released these images that reportedly show what was happening inside. The director of Gaza hospitals confirmed that tanks had breached the complex and soldiers had entered areas including the emergency and surgery departments. The Israeli Defense Forces say they are carrying out a precise operation against Hamas. They also said they are searching for hostages and successfully delivered incubators, baby food, and medical supplies. Israel has accused Hamas of using Al-Shifa as a base of operations, which the United States corroborated on Tuesday.
Hamas and PIJ members operate a command and control node from Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. They have weapons stored there and are prepared to respond to an Israeli military operation against the facility.
Earlier this week, the Israeli army released images of a weapons cache it said it found in a raid on another Gaza hospital. According to local officials, thousands of people, including medical staff and patients, were still holed up inside the complex. Although the Israeli army says it called on civilians to evacuate before launching its offensive, the World Health Organization said such a request was unrealistic.
The people in the hospitals were very vulnerable, very sick, so moving them was an impossible task, and you were asking doctors and nurses to move people knowing that that would kill them. A hospital should never be under attack.
Witnesses have described horrific conditions inside the hospital, with scant food and water, doctors performing surgeries without anesthetics or electricity, and hundreds of bodies buried in mass graves or left to decompose out in the open.
Well, covering developments for us today at Al-Shifa is our correspondent Iris Makler. She's in Jerusalem, and I spoke to her a short while ago.
They are saying, actually, it's very hard to get verified or verifiable information, but what they're saying is that they went in western section, definitely going under, which is where they believe the Hamas command and control center is. There was some talk that there might be hostages there, or perhaps important Hamas leaders. Neither has been found so far, and I have heard other analysts suggesting that they actually would have been long gone to another part, perhaps constantly in motion beneath the Gaza Strip in that subterranean world right now that Hamas is operating within. What they have found, they say, are weapons stores. So I haven't seen pictures of them. I've only heard a report. And I think I have to say that the reason that this is such a contentious issue is obviously because of the suffering of patients and civilians in this ongoing war in a hospital. But the issue of whether attacking a hospital is a war crime or whether hiding within a hospital is a war crime is why the two narratives why it's so important to both sides to make their narrative understood. Because if there are no Hamas, if Hamas is operating from within a hospital, that's a war crime. If Israel attacks a hospital and there are no Hamas people there, that's a war crime. There's also some discussion about whether it's a war crime to attack a hospital in any event. But I think that's why this issue is so contentious, and that's why we hear so much from Hamas, its military wing, and other people defending its position and denying that they have any presence there.
Well, next, let's go to the Israeli city of Ashkelon. It's just 15 kilometres from the border with Gaza, making it a target for Hamas rocket fire. Now, NGOs there have been trying to support vulnerable Israelis living in Ashkelon, including survivors of the Holocaust. Our correspondent Salil Galuccio has sent us this report.
Over a month after the Hamas attacks on October the 7th, this cultural centre has still not reopened. The site is now being used as a distribution centre by an organisation named Latet, which means to give in Hebrew.
It's very important for us to take part in this mobilization. It's vital for the people we're helping.
And they're not helping just anyone, but survivors of the Holocaust. They do so by delivering food and hygiene parcels, enough to last for around a fortnight.
Toothpaste, toothbrushes, wipes, deodorant. The idea is for them to be able to live during this time of war in a kind of self-reliance in terms of products, so they don't have to leave their homes. And we can relieve them of the worry of how they're going to eat tomorrow, how they're going to wash tomorrow.
Because currently in Ashkelon, going out means taking risks, even more so when you can't run in the event of an alert.
We'll load, we'll deliver.
Galia is a volunteer. For her, helping survivors is much more than a duty.
It's not about suffering, it's about action. It's not about accepting what we're being subjected to. It's my way of protesting. That's how I see it.
The team arrives in one of the poorest areas of the city. This rundown building is where 89-year-old Alice lives. Like Alice, 27% of Ashkelon's population has nowhere to take refuge in the event of an attack.
Every war with Hamas reminds me of what happened a long time ago. Our enemies leave us alone for a moment. We think we're safe and secure. Then all of a sudden, boom. How are we supposed to be optimistic?
Upon leaving Alice's district, it's clear just how much life has come to a standstill in Ashkelon. Shops are closed, streets are practically deserted. Zoya, aged 90, has not set foot outside since the 7th of October.
I live by the sea. They came by sea. I try to be strong, but I can't. I'm afraid to go outside because I won't be able to reach the shelter in time. I have a nurse at home and she has to take out my rubbish.
Those who were children during the Second World War know better than anyone that it will take time for Ashkelon's population to recover and live normally again.
That report from our team in Ashkelon. Well, let's turn now to Ukraine, where fighting in the east is focused on the shattered town of Avdiivka. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has claimed that Russia is taking heavy casualties there. But after months of fighting, the front lines have not moved that much, as Catherine Viette now reports.
Ruin and rubble. Not much is left standing in Avdiivka. Its location, overlooking Russian-held Donetsk some 20 kilometers away, makes it a strategically important town.
It's been under near constant Russian shelling as the Russian army tries to encircle the town. For the 1,500 or so residents that remain, life is bleak.
You know what I want to say to Putin? He's a bastard, and I want to tell all those in Donetsk that they're scum. They don't know where and what they're firing at. There are people here, Russians.
President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning that Russia has been intensifying its attacks along the eastern front line, near the cities of Donetsk, Kupiansk, and Avdiivka, but that Ukrainian soldiers were holding their own.
Russia is already losing soldiers and equipment in Avdiivka faster and on a larger scale than in Bakhmut. Withstanding their pressure is extremely difficult. The more Russian forces are destroyed near Avdiivka, the worse the overall situation will be for the enemy, for the rest of the war.
Ukrainian officials continue to press their Western allies for aid and weapons to counter Russia's aggression. The EU's defense ministers reaffirmed their support for Kyiv at a meeting in Brussels, but warned that the bloc could miss its goal of supplying Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells by next March.
It doesn't mean that we already have 1 million shots ready by March. So maybe we will not have 1 million by March, but it will depend on how quickly the orders comes to the industry and how quickly the industry reacts.
Kyiv has often complained that its forces don't have enough shells to keep pace with Russia, whose troops have been firing up to 4 times more munitions.
Next to the United Kingdom, where the Supreme Court there has ruled that the government's controversial plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is illegal. 5 judges at the court agreed unanimously that people sent to the East African nation would be, quote, at real risk of ill treatment. Delano de Souza has this report.
It's a major blow to British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The country's top court has unanimously ruled the government's controversial plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is illegal.
Asking ourselves whether there were substantial grounds for believing that a real risk of refoulement existed at the relevant time, we have concluded that there were. The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
Wednesday's decision drew criticism over in Rwanda. This after the British Supreme Court cited Kigali's poor human rights record, enforced disappearances, as well as the practice of sending migrants back to countries of origin. Britain's Prime Minister too expressed regret.
Has your plan failed, Prime Minister?
The judgment confirms that the principle of removing asylum seekers to a safe third country is lawful. The government has already been working in advance on a new treaty with Rwanda, which we will finalise in light of today's judgment.
The Prime Minister also suggested he'd be willing to change Britain's domestic legal framework or revisit international conventions if his revised Rwanda plan is held up by courts in the future. Critics, however, argue the government's approach is wrong.
There is no evidence, the government doesn't point to any evidence, that deterrent policies like sending people to Rwanda actually impact on the number of arrivals.
The government's controversial policy was created under former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and was carried forward by Rishi Sunak. Wednesday's ruling comes a day after Sunak's former Home Secretary Suella Braverman hit out at the government for having no plan B if the Rwanda plan was deemed unlawful. Britain has so far spent £140 million on its policy without any migrants being sent to Rwanda.
Now, a new study on climate change says that heat-related deaths could rise nearly 5-fold by the middle of the 21st century. This if the world stays on its current trajectory of a 2.7 degrees Celsius temperature increase. Elisa Herbert has the details.
The words on this sign read Climate Refuge, a museum acting as a cool place to shelter from the heat, more of which could be desperately needed in the future. According to a report by over 100 researchers from international institutions, heat-related deaths could increase 4.7-fold by the middle of this century without global action on climate change.
Heat-related mortality of adults over 65 years of age, a very vulnerable age group, have increased by 85% since the 90s alone. And we now know that more than half of that increase wouldn't have occurred if temperatures hadn't increased. So we know that it's climate change causing this.
The 2023 report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change was published on Wednesday and outlines the imperative need for a health-centred response in a world facing irreversible harms. It states that in 2023, the world saw its highest global temperatures in over 100,000 years, and also that areas affected by extreme drought are growing, jeopardising water security, sanitation and food production. One of the solutions posed by this researcher is to consider how infrastructure and economies plan for rising temperatures.
For example, the existence of terraces, green roofs, these work. Blue zones, parks with fountains and climatic shelters work. Therefore, things that are known to work at the local level should be applied.
But first, he says the goal is to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. According to the report, 1,337 tonnes of carbon dioxide is still emitted every second, the consequences of which could be dire on our health systems.
And those are our top stories on the programme. Thank you for watching. Hello, you are watching Middle East Matters on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi. Here's what's coming up this week in the show. Amid the war in Gaza, we take you to Israel and the occupied West Bank, where violence is worsening and tensions are running extremely high. But we'll also hear from Israelis and Palestinians trying to build bridges between their communities, despite the anger and the loss on both sides. We start the programme in the occupied West Bank, where amid the war in Gaza, life for Palestinians